I appreciate it. I'll start with a thank you to Amanda and Ashley. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you all. I don't have anything to present, so I'm going to kind of give a quick, hopefully 10-minute kind of rundown of my background, my career, and then talk about a few projects that I have worked on that I think are really, again, like I said, going to be relevant and maybe interesting to you guys on this group. And then I want to leave it open for questions. And I also have a couple of kind of topics or prompts for conversation where I might be able to just share some insight from my previous experience and or help, if anybody's got ideas or questions and kind of collaborate on that because I think there's some really interesting topics happening right now in data. So yeah, I kind of already said, so my name is Kristin Mannion. I am born in Syracuse. I left for a long time, did my college in Indiana, worked for a large multinational out of college. And I actually am one of those rare people who studied what I actually got into after college. So my degree is in business administration with a concentration in IT management. And I went right into a development program after I graduated, focused on IT. I worked for GE, which is a huge company with a lot of different pieces, and although now three separate companies since I left, but I worked with their healthcare business. So I did kind of a multitude of different roles there. Worked in their M&A team. I worked in data privacy. I worked in their like service engineering business. And when I graduated out of my development program, I went to work in commercial operations. And my role there was essentially doing process design as well as solution design, mainly in the Salesforce platform for something called configuration, pricing, and quoting. So if you're familiar with CRM, CPQ is the next piece of that. And it's really about taking your customer data and enabling your sales teams to sell compliant things. And in a place like GE, that was a really big job because they sell everything from a multi-million-dollar MRI machine all the way to, a 10-cent tubing connected to a blood pressure cuff. And they sold it in every region in the world. So it was a big, complex kind of effort. And I'm going to just close my door really quick because that's my son crying in the background. If you just heard that pop on there. Um, so it was a really, really interesting kind of way to start your career. It's probably, I don't know of other too many other jobs where you're getting the breadth look at a gigantic international corporation. And I was really lucky to hit it just at the right time. So I ended up managing about $1 billion of our portfolio, converting onto a new platform, standardizing global processes. I got my Lean Six Sigma green belt while I was doing that, did a lot of project management and then also a lot of software design. And that was sort of my first more technical experience, I would say. So my background, I'm an engineering dropout, so I don't know if that maybe means I should just leave right away. But I thought I was going to be an engineer, and then I shirked it for a while. But I really came back to the technical work that I was doing in terms of designing code and working with a team of, I think the final team number that I was working with like 25 developers, building really just big things. And at the end of that experience, I realized I was not necessarily um, getting what I wanted out of the role, and I was working really hard. The downside, as I'm sure some of you guys know, of working with big international corporations is that your teams are in every time zone, which means that you're working in every time zone, and that's only sustainable for so long. So I decided to leave that role. There was another, little interlude there while I was working in Europe and was supposed to be moving to Turkey, and there was an attempted coup, and I wasn't allowed to stay, so I had to get relocated. So if anybody's interested in that kind of stuff, I'm happy to talk about it, but I'll leave it at that for now. And what the timing of that, right as that was happening, and I decided I wanted to try something new. I got an offer to work with a presidential transition team in Washington, D.C. in the 2016 election. And essentially, I had this experience with Salesforce and CPQ and sort of the design, project management, process design as well. And they were looking for that as a kind of a shadow building up towards a what would become the White House sort of operations team. So I worked on that for a few months, ended up that the candidate I was working for did not win. So all that work sort of went to the wayside. But it was a really good experience. I got to meet some really interesting people. And after doing that, I realized I really wanted to work on something that I could manage myself, where I could have a really big impact. I'd sort of been part of these big efforts, and I was kind of a cog in the wheel, and I wanted to see what I could do if I really struck out on my own. So I left in 2016. So in 2017, I started my own company called the Alvina Group. And I'll take you a little bit through the arc of that, of the company's journey, because I heard a couple of people mentioning entrepreneurship. It's really not a linear path. So that's really where my digging into data started. I really initially intended to be an engineering company. I'm a woman-owned business. I'm a certified woman-owned business through New York State. And I really thought, I'll be an engineering company. I'll be able to bring the technical part of this. I'll be able to really bring a high excellence standard to technology in the construction space. There really is not one today. And I thought I could find an engineering partner. They could do the technical engineering work. I could bring the technology, and we could do something really cool. And then I found out in New York State, you're not allowed to own an engineering business if you are not a certified engineer yourself. That also goes for accounting, medical stuff, architecture, any of the certified professions. So that sort of put a pin in it. And but in that process, I had gotten in touch with a lot of architecture, engineering, construction firms, and I ultimately went into consulting just on operations for a lot of those teams to try to help them better understand technology, better use their data. Somebody mentioned, data-driven decision making, and that was a big thing that you think comes naturally to people, or makes sense. And I'll just be the first to say that I got hired on a lot of jobs to do really obvious things, because it's just not a skill set that a lot of business people in other industries prioritize or have. And not to say that they're not interested in it, I think they are, but it's a big learning curve. So if you have things that feel really obvious and natural to you as a data tech person, chances are that's putting you a few steps ahead of a lot of other people. And if you kind of look in the right place, you can really make a big difference. So I started doing that consulting work, and I was lucky enough to have a couple of really good partners support me. And then I was able to use that money to self-fund a couple of other projects. So the first specific data project that I worked on was something we called pre-fees, which is a process in the real estate development world called feasibility studies. And essentially what that is, if you need money from a bank to do a capital project, if you're a real estate developer or an entrepreneur trying to buy space or something like that, you have to prove to the bank that it's going to be worth it, right? That there's going to be, there's a real line of sight to what you want to do. And the way you do that is by running a feasibility study. And most of the time that actually is happening by market research companies. So market research companies are being paid $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 to run feasibility studies to say, yes, you should build an apartment building here. It will work. There's all the other apartments are full. There's a need. And they do that with a lot of publicly available data. And as you can imagine, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 is a pretty hefty price tag. So you have to be really far in the process to be making that investment. And a lot of people who are early in the process or who are entrepreneurs don't have the money to make that investment. So we were building a tool essentially that aggregated and did sort of the public data part of that's repeatable based on different categories. So we did look at apartments, we looked at senior living, we looked at multifamily housing, kind of ran those queries and pulled from all the publicly available data to say, if you don't do any other quality checking on this data, here's what the raw data would say about this investment. And that would at least give whoever was starting the search a chance to be able to see what they're working with from a data perspective, what the bank is going to be cross-checking against, all those kinds of things. Now, we finished the prototype for that project about March 15th, 2020. So it wasn't exactly a great time to be marketing to real estate developers. Real estate development and apartment building, everything, construction in the whole world had shut down, right? But especially people who were into space and building space thought that they were going to be not doing a lot for a long time. So we sat on that for a few months. We shopped it around. We tried to get beta users. We tried to get some interest in the investment space to continue to build it. And we realized it just wasn't, the timing was not right to really make something out of that. So then we stopped and said, okay, what else can we do with this information? I mean, we've collected a big trove. We've connected to a lot of data sources. We've done a lot of the legwork of understanding structurally how these pieces fit together. What else could we do with it? And through a couple of different programs, we came up with applying that to the health equity space. So I know it's a big jump. You think real estate, oh, what does real estate have to do with health equity? But what you find, and I'm sure some of you guys are probably familiar with this, is that, your zip code is actually the biggest determinant of your health outcomes in your life. And so that's sort of known at a research and a policy level, but it's really not applied, I would say, most places in a day-to-day sense. And so what we said was we had done all this work, we had made it really digestible to be able to take all this information about a particular location. Why don't we feed this to the medical providers who are actually seeing the people from this location, as opposed to looking at an apartment building? Now we can tell you about a house, we can tell you about a neighborhood, we can tell you about green space, we can tell you about food access and all sorts of other things. And let's actually serve this to the providers, the healthcare providers who are doing their best to serve patients who are really influenced by a lot of this environmental and real estate data. And so I spent about a year building that product up to what we call it Tag Health. But basically, we worked with a lot of different companies, including the information exchange for medical records, which is, in case you don't know, in the US, we have, right, hospitals have your own medical records, and there's actually a nonprofit partner that sits in the middle and will exchange your records between hospitals and providers to try to make that available to you. We designed a whole UI where it fit into as a module within electronic health record provider or electronic health record systems. So there was no additional like UI or anything that you needed to build, and really it was about thinking about the user experience to try to consume that information in a time and a place that would actually be effective for those users. Because as I'm sure, again, you all are familiar with, there's nothing more annoying than Xing out on alerts. And we heard from a lot of people, like, somebody comes in with a broken arm and I open up their chart and they're flashing at me how this person is allergic to bees. I don't want to have to click out of this alert that this person is allergic to bees to tell them that I put a cast on their arm, right? Like things that are just totally irrelevant. So it's really was about understanding in a deep way the actual process that people were following. I heard industrial engineering as well, right? It was a lot of understanding the flow of information and the flow of people and the highest kind of issue areas that we really needed to understand so that people could consume that data. So it's been about 18 months building out that tool. At the end of that process, we had, over 100 customer interviews. We had worked with nationally a lot of different groups. And unfortunately, the kind of final feedback that we got, even from investors, was basically that there's not enough money in that space to make this tool worth it, which is really disappointing. I mean, when you have the chance to feed a doctor, like, hey, that this person is living in a house that likely has lead, and it's a pediatrician, and they have, a person in front of them that would really benefit from being tested for lead beyond the state standard or intermittently with the state standard. That's really important, especially in areas like Syracuse, where, for example, lead poisoning really affects people. And sadly, it's something that's well known, but it really causes a lot of problems. And right now we just have really broad sweeping, hey, you should go and get tested for lead if you have a child under the age of 1 or at 1 year old. But a lot of people don't, because it's hard to get to the phlebotomist, and it's hard, like, kids obviously don't like to have their blood drawn, or you have a couple kids, or they're in school, and there's just a lot of factors. And it's a much more convincing thing to say, based on the address, and I know you live there, you're actually at a high risk. You should really do this so that we can start the processes to get you treatment if you have lead poisoning. And it's a much different story, but unfortunately, general practitioners and other things, their money is not there. And so we decided ultimately to table that product as well. And since then, I have moved on to primarily working now in a bioplastic startup. So a bit of a jump, but a similarly mission-driven effort. And I'm doing a lot of the operations work. And we're dealing with a lot of research data, but then also a lot of other data in an effort to align the things that we need to do to get venture capital, and then again, hopefully bring bioplastics to a scale and hopefully help us all in the long run and get a little bit of plastic pollution out of the world. So it's a long, winding road to, I think, anyone's career, but that's the quick summary of mine with, I think, some highlights on the pieces that might be interesting to you guys. So I'm going to first just open it up to general questions. I'm happy to really talk about anything, whether it be, career planning, or, job hunting or entrepreneurship, startups, data, any of those broad categories. And if there aren't any questions, I have, like I said, a couple of other prompts that I want to put out to you guys, but I'll leave it there for now. Oh no. I know it's 7:30 on a Thursday and it's like everybody's got long days of work, but
No, no, that was amazing. And I have about 12,000 questions, but I like to open it up to the group beforehand. So, does anyone in the group have anything they want to touch on or questions they want answered? If not,
I saw
um,
Bei Chu came off
Uh,
mute.
yeah, Kristin. Yeah, I'm kind of curious about the project you did with the lead poisoning. Could you go a little bit in detail what it is and how you did it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, for anybody out there who's kind of interested in public policy, you may have seen a lot of talk about lead lately, especially in the Syracuse area, but honestly, nationally, anywhere where there's a kind of old housing stock, it's really a hot topic because essentially the way that lead poisoning most often works is there's lead in paint, there's lead in pipes, and if you're a child particularly, you're very susceptible basically to either eating the flakes of the paint because it tastes sweet or potentially having lead from your pipes actually poison you. And right now, the way that it works, the policy, at New York State level, as well as like mostly federally, is essentially that you get tested for lead when you're 12 months old. Um, and if you have lead poisoning, there's a multitude of developmental delays, especially in the brain, that causes, and then otherwise, um, there's other kind of issues that you can have. But there's also ways of treating it. It's kind of like a dialysis for your blood of getting the lead out and things like that. But you have to know that you have it before you can start any of those treatment plans, and that's a blood test. And again, it's universal right now. So lots of people don't end up getting it. And then we also find out that there's people that move around and they might get it at 2, 3, 4, but they're not actually going to get tested for it unless they have a doctor that knows they should be tested for it because it's not legally required. So there's a lot of data out there about housing stock that can be indicative of lead. So again, like I said, the pipes that you have when your house was built can be very indicative of your lead risk in that particular dwelling. And so what we did is we tapped into there's multiple levels of it. There's a municipal level here at the city of Syracuse. There's also a state level lead or well housing information that it has lead, the lead indicators. There are also some national groups, like a lot of academic researchers have done a lot of research around lead poisoning and around the modeling that can trigger, the risk factors for lead for a particular parcel. And so we looked at all of that and sort of brought it together. The real trick with lead is that um, it's hard to know specifically whether or not something has a lead risk. Because if you paint your house or you paint the rooms in your house, that can actually take away the lead risk. That like 3 coats of paint, I think, is considered remediation in the state of New York. So there's a lot of things that you don't always know, and there's a lot of competing data and things that happen sort of in the time spectrum that can make certain data become outdated very quickly. And you have a lot of conflicting data potentially at different levels. Or like the health department in Syracuse actually runs the lead remediation program for Onondaga County. So their data is independent and is focused on the program that they run, trying to remediate lead in Onondaga County, which is very different than housing data that's maintained at the city level or the state level. And they're not really copacetic with each other. And again, it's probably something you can already tell, a personal frustration of mine that we don't always keep our eye on the outcomes in the research. So the program that Onondaga County Health Department is running is sort of separate and apart from, let's say, codes enforcement in the city of Syracuse is separate and apart from real estate tax parcel data for the state of New York. And so because all those things are not necessarily talking to each other, and because the people who are dealing with that data are mostly lay people, right? People who their job is not technical, is not data, you get a lot of disparities. And so we worked pretty hard to bring a few of those together. I will say it was really intense, kind of coming up with what I would love to eventually be. I think somebody out there will do it, is like an AI model for bringing all this data together. We did it just to a non-data person. I'm sure it seems like AI, but really it was just a structured logic model where we processed to prioritize like which data we thought was the most accurate, and or to consider like projecting forward certain data in order to make it more relevant to what we were trying to do. So I think that it will be out there that more of that lead data will become relevant. But for us, the goal was, okay, there's a provider in the hospital, a nurse, a doctor, a PA, somebody who's dealing with this patient. We want them to know, hey, this patient has a high risk because of where they live. They have a high risk for lead. And if that's a child, obviously really important to influence them, go get it tested. If that's an adult, even adults can have lead poisoning if they're experiencing certain symptoms. Like this is something you should know as a part of their environment. And so our goal was really to take all those different pieces of data and deliver an alert to a doctor at the time that it might be relevant, to kind of show, hey, here's a lead risk, you should do something about it. It wasn't, like I said, it ultimately is tough because a general practitioner, who's the highest likelihood person to be dealing with someone with a lead issue, also doesn't necessarily want to waste their referrals to a program that might not be able to help that person. So let's say again, you have lead risk, or you find out your child has lead poisoning, someone refers you to the county health department for lead remediation. If you're a renter, there's all sorts of things that come in there. If you're a homeowner, there's all sorts of like costs and other things that can make it very difficult to remediate. So it's also hard because a lot of these issues are very systemic in terms of what the solution to it would be. But again, to us, it was always the highest priority is at least letting someone know that they have a problem. And then from there, had very delusions of grandeur of bringing together all the agencies that were working on these different projects, and connecting them and giving them tools, not only for the providers, but then also for the potential program managers, for the codes folks. Like, how do you bring all this together in a way that is functional for each of these different user groups without disrupting their entire current workflow? Because that stuff just never really takes off. And that was a super long-winded answer, so I'm very sorry for a very short question, but I hope that, do you have any other specific questions about lead?
Speaking of lead, I don't know if you know about the city of Flint in Michigan. They had a big lead poisoning in their drinking water system.
Yes.
And I think the city was trying to build an AI model to try to decide which house or neighborhood has the lead pipe so they can dig it up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think has these type of AI models is going to have very good impact on those, especially for people who work in an environmental science like me. It's very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great example of an AI model that's delivering a specific solution to a municipal group. And that's actually one of the most straightforward uses for the lead data is DPW like projects, so capital improvement projects to replace pipes and things like that. I think if you're interested in that area, a really interesting intersection of that is then not just improving the infrastructure for the future, but then also how do you be inclusive of the people who are already living in that environment. And I think that's the bridge that doesn't always happen because again, the program, the capital improvement program, the AI model is helping influence where they're making those capital investments, but it's not always, those teams don't really tend to be responsible for the existing infrastructure of the people that are already there. So I think also kind of taking what my personal kind of passion is taking stuff that's like generally infrastructure seeming and finding other ways to apply it into life because there really is the Venn diagram is huge. You know, we don't fund it that way and we don't necessarily work on projects that way, but it is a really interesting space and there's a lot of room to get creative or potentially do really novel and innovative things using that data for other purposes.
Thanks. Very interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else have questions or topics, or anybody else want to chime in? I'm sorry, I feel like sometimes I can be just dominating it, but yeah, Jerry, go ahead.
Just in the same train of stuff here. I don't know how much money you needed for funding for that, but it's been a while since I've been in the field. If my memory is right, there might be grants and stuff available for NIM and NHS for funding something like that if you were to make it open for the government to utilize it. I don't know where you would get the workforce because I don't know if I would trust that to open source people. That gets a bit messy, especially with documentation. But I just thought I'd chime in and say there might still be a way to resurrect that one through the right resource channels.
Yeah, absolutely. And we looked at a lot and we were lucky enough to get similar advice as we were going through it. Some of the challenges, and this maybe speaks also just to general entrepreneurship or startup money, a lot of those are pretty long cycle funds, and a lot of them require that you have either be a nonprofit or have a nonprofit partner, especially for the government funds specifically related to the environmental improvements and like even some of the environmental health money that's out there is really tied to the dollars because I think where there's a bit of a gap is that people assume that a lot of this is already happening. And so they want to feed dollars into the programs that are quote unquote fixing it. And I think there is actually a pretty big gap between the people who are getting funded to fix something and the information that they actually have on which to base those programs and given the delay in like, I now know there's an issue and I want to fix it. And now I have to apply for funding. And then I get that funding 2 years later. It creates a pretty tough lag for any of this like innovation stuff. I think it's really about finding kind of the right partners. And we were able to talk to some people, I think, Jerry, who had better luck in states like California, where they were able to get a coalition or they had like a forward-thinking nonprofit who built a coalition, which included some serious data people who were really technically well-skilled. And then they were able to run it kind of through that nonprofit. I think coming at it from the private sector and coming at it from the technical side was what made it really hard for us because a lot of those resources were not tapped. And I will say, disappointingly, in the city of Syracuse, although it gets so much, press and news coverage for some of these environmental issues, there was not the same interest in, even from the academic side or from the nonprofit side, to try to be at like the center of it. Everybody just sort of wants their little piece that they can be like, yes, I did it and it works right. And I can show that, this money made a difference, and they don't really want to take on the super complex systems, structure of it all. All right, I saw some stuff come through the chat. I'm not sure if, yeah. Oh, bioplastics. Sure. So yeah, jumping a little bit away from the environmental equity piece. So I recently discovered SU libraries have the largest collection on the history of plastic. Oh, interesting. Yeah, so actually to Amanda's spot there. So I partnered up with my co-founder for the bioplastics company, and he's a PhD out of SUNY ESF. So yeah, his research was in the bioprocess engineering space, and essentially they came up with a bacteria that will consume a highly variable waste product and turn it into a PHA bioplastic. Is anybody on here like a chemist by trade? Use a little hand raise button if you are, because I'm about to say some things that I do not need a real scientist fact checking. I'm just kidding. My language is just I'm a layperson in all ways.
Ashley is, and she will not speak up.
Ashley, raise
No,
your
not
hand.
at all. No. I
right.
wasn't allowed in the fancy chemistry classes, so you could say anything and I would believe it.
No. All right. Well, that's good. Then I'm in good company. I will do my best to be very fact-based, but there's a lot of intricacies at the chemical side of this, and I tend to brush over with a broad stroke. So, um, there's a few things in the bioplastics world. My first thing I'll say is I'm really sorry to burst most of your bubbles, but most of what we know today as bioplastic is kind of garbage. It's actually not really bio in the ways that you and I, as a layperson, would consider it. Even things where you see it says compostable. So if you've seen those plastic bags that will say compostable, or even they market bags to go in compost bins, right? Those are actually only compostable in an industrial setting, and there's only industrial composting at a large scale in a few cities in the US. It's much more common in Europe, but it's really uncommon here. I think SF has it, Seattle has it, and there might be one or two others. But essentially, what those plastics are actually plastics that will not break down except in really high pressure, high heat environments that need to be pretty meticulously controlled. So if you happen to live in one of those places that has industrial composting, okay, that's about as good as you can do right now in the US, but unfortunately that leaves a huge number of other bioplastic things as not really being all that they say they are, including things like Tide Pods or your dishwasher tablets and stuff. Any of that stuff that comes coated in plastic, those plastics will dissolve into water, but they don't actually degrade. So that's where you're getting a lot of these issues around microplastics and other things, is not only traditional polymer or like, oh my gosh, no, I'm blanking on the name, petrochemical based plastics breaking down over time or being chipped off or whatever, but you're also getting that from a lot of new applications of plastics that aren't actually biodegradable. So this research that my co-founder did out of ESF actually it's home compostable and marine biodegradable. So those are the two standards, if anybody's interested in being a nerd like me. Those are the two standards that actually will tell you whether or not something is truly, in the way that we would think about it, are biodegradable. And so this plastic, where we're starting, is actually with it as a barrier coating on paper products. And the reason for that is a lot of disposable plastics in the US come from the fact that there's nothing else that has the properties of like a plastic fork, right? Or, and some of us probably have used paper straws, and they're very frustrating because although they are paper and biodegradable and that makes you feel good, they don't really work that well as a straw after 2 minutes or whatever. So our goal is to basically use this PHA plastic that came from what's called a waste feed stock. So think of like hemp fibers after they've been processed. A lot of that can't go anywhere right now. There's a ton of agriculture waste that just can't be reused in any way. And we can take the sugars from that, we can process it with a proprietary bacteria, and then we can actually put out a bioplastic that has highly flexible and highly tunable characteristics. And our goal is primary goal right now is to put that onto paper, so like a molded fiber clamshell, or if we actually want your Starbucks cup to be for you to be able to throw that right into the recycling bin instead of into the trash can. And you can't do that right now because it's coated with polyethylene to make it so your coffee doesn't get all over you. And what we could provide actually would have a certain runway of keeping your cup totally fine until it goes into the recycling stream, and then that bioplastic would actually degrade as paper gets repulped and put back into the paper cycle. And then when it gets too short to be recycled in the paper mill, we would take it right back, process it again, turn those sugars back into the plastic, and try to create, a full cycle loop with that. So there's a few different, I can talk about the operations part of that. I can talk about fundraising. I can talk about the other rest of the bioplastics, but that's kind of the gist of what we're trying to do.
So speaking of runway, one of the kind of big topics right now is creating biodegradable fashion, or literally just, I say runway, but t-shirts, jeans, things that do not have real plastic in them, they just have biodegradable plastic, so that instead of ending up in landfills, they can degrade as they should. What are your thoughts on that?
So
Is it still just kind of like a buzzword, or do you think it's getting to a place where it can actually do good?
one of the good things is there's a lot of people working in this space. So if we kind of fall in the fundraising world, what they generally call climate tech. We're one of a lot of bioplastic producers. You guys might have seen other ones. People are trying to build it from algae or from seaweed. And the good thing is that it's really going to take many different solutions to solve the problem. So the piece that we're building in the PHA space is really highly specific to one stream right now. There's a million other types of plastics that are out there, and those other companies are trying to create plastic replacements in many different industries. And they're trying to build specific solutions to those industries to make it cost effective and reliable for those industries to really convert over. We just have a really, really, petroleum-based plastics have just a really good head start, is I think the best way to say it, right? They've been around for a really long time. They've been subsidized in a lot of ways. Oil and gas, as you guys probably know, they don't pay for most of the production externalities that they have, so they don't really have, it's very, very cheap, right? Like, thing about plastic is it's super cheap. The only way to compete in the current market is to have almost a no cost input to make your bioplastic. Because if your input has cost, you're already like polyethylene or petroleum-based plastics are here. If you're not at or below that line for an input cost, like you're already starting higher from just that first one, which then means that your production costs, if they're at all higher, which they will be for a period of time, right, until production is really good, that means that, and then your distribution costs, and then everything just takes you higher and higher and higher than where the petroleum stuff is, and they have super established infrastructure, supply chains, all that stuff. So it's not impossible. I would say I haven't really seen anybody in the fashion industry doing it well yet. And really in the fashion world, like the kind of craziest thing is that a lot of fabric now is actually made from plastic. So a lot of the best thing you can do in fashion is actually go back to naturally produced fibers for your fabrics. And that's actually like one of the best ways to get towards real and better kind of eco-friendly fashion. I don't know that anybody I know of is doing the fast fashion stuff yet, or is doing like the replacement of those bioplastics in fabrics yet. I know some like adhesives, they're starting to replace some adhesives with some more eco-friendly adhesives and stuff, but these are really small pieces to,
A very large industry. Yeah, I know that we can see, the Met Gala was last week. We can see celebrities being like, oh, we have very sustainable dresses on that we're gonna wear once. But going into, people think that's fashion, but fashion is really what people wear every day. So what you buy at Target, what you buy at Walmart, what you buy at like Marshalls and TJ Maxx, those are the things you have to consider. It's one of the largest plastic producers in the world, that never actually gets reused. So I think that biodegradable plastics, or even just converting to natural fabrics, is one of the key elements of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, there's a reason that it's reduce, reuse, and then recycle, because really the best way to help solve some of these issues is to just reduce the consumption. And you really can't compete with that. So, asking yourself whether or not you really need the thing you're going to go buy is a great way, or looking for, stuff that doesn't come in a plastic container. I'll tell you, I've been looking for laundry detergent and dishwasher detergent that doesn't have plastic in it, either in packaging or in the actual thing. And it is hard. It is kind of crazy how much and how pervasive it is. But it's possible, I think, and it takes, people who just made aware. I think that can really help influence choices.
Yeah, and it's so easy to walk into like Wegmans, for example, and be like, oh, it's so easy to buy a rotisserie chicken. Or I could buy a regular like whole chicken and cook it that is covered in very much less plastic. So your rotisserie chicken comes in a bag of plastic. Your regular whole chicken comes in, some biodegradable plastic. Often lately, those styrofoam trays are sometimes biodegradable plastic, if you can find a place that does that. But either way, the wrapping and the styrofoam is still less plastic than getting an entire bag for a rotisserie chicken, much less the amount of consumption of carbon that goes along the line of how that chicken came to be rotisseried.
Yep. And unfortunately, again, I'm a real negative Nancy right now, and I don't mean to be, but when you get into the plastic world, it kind of takes you down. The idea of recycling plastic is kind of fake. Most plastics can't be recycled, and it's for a pretty simple reason, and that's because most plastics are actually a combination of multiple different chemical compositions. And so as soon as you blend those plastics together, you really can't ever unmingle them. And so you can't recycle them, because if you do, you degrade one or the other. And again, even recycling, like, it's not cost competitive, because producing something with polyethylene or with straight from oil and gas is super cheap, and recycling something that's not pure is more expensive than just using something new. So like the whole structure of that is unfortunately really kind of wrongly set up, and it's because nobody pays for the damage that might be done by it, right? It's cheaper for us as consumers for them to make it new, and it's cheaper for them to make it new. So why would they bother trying to reuse that stuff? So really, in Onondaga County, for example, pretty much like milk jugs and dairy containers are the only plastics that can be recycled, and everything else, all your clamshells, everything your fruit comes in, all that stuff, plastic bags, none of that can be recycled, which is just a bummer. And I'm not coming from a place of like, I buy fruit in plastic containers. I'm not, I'm certainly not perfect in that space, but it is kind of, there's a whole marketing effort that's happening to try to convince us all that, oh, plastic really isn't that bad because we'll recycle it. And it's just almost impossible to do, and almost impossible to do at scale, especially.
And I think there's a very interesting thing that Michael Pollan said lately, where you try as hard as you can and you still can't be that person that is the ideal environmentalist. You can't be that person who goes to every dinner party and says, sorry, I'm not going to eat the thing that you made because it's not organic and ethically sourced. Because then you have no friends. And you can't exist in the world anymore in a way that does not coexist with plastics, unfortunately, but we can do our best.
Absolutely. And again, hopefully there's a lot of innovation happening and people will find a way to make it so that you as the consumer don't have to suffer and contribute to these like environmental things that people don't want to be contributing to. And it's really just about how long it's going to take us to get there and how long it's going to take us to replace a lot of these this plastic infrastructure that it's just been around a long time. So it's always hard to take down a giant.
Yeah, and we're looking to companies like you and those you've grown, and we are so impressed by everything you've done. At least I can't talk for the multitudes. I am so impressed by all of the things that you've done. And the way that you've kept value throughout the entirety of entrepreneurship, which is a difficult thing to maintain.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to share. So if anybody has any other questions or you want to reach out to me, send me an email. We can get coffee, we can chat, LinkedIn, whatever. I've had a really great time talking to you guys. It's always a little funny to come back and look at your whole career and say like, oh yeah, here's the exact path that I followed, because it definitely did not feel like that as I was going through it. But I'm always really, really excited to be connected to like-minded people who are interested in similar things. And I'll just say, some parting words like trust your gut when you're making these decisions in your own life, and have some confidence that you have skills and interests that are really meaningful and different than what other people have, because it's definitely, you sometimes get in an echo chamber when you work in tech or you're studying in tech or you're studying in data and you think, oh, everybody gets all this stuff, and out there in the world there's just a huge need for it. So whatever you're trying to do, even if it's not specifically data or tech, you'll bring that mindset and it can really make the world of difference for the way things get done. So kudos to all of you for all the work you've been doing and for coming on things like this. And I definitely will be back because I love this kind of community. So super excited to have the time with all of you guys.
Well, we're so excited to have you back anytime. Thank you so much for coming. This was not the talk I expected to have, and it was so much better. So thank you. I hope to connect with you being in Syracuse myself. We can go have coffee or something. And yeah, any other questions? Otherwise, we're coming up on 8 people. Wonderful. Thank you
so much for having me.
so much, Kristin.
All right, we'll talk. Hopefully I'll see you guys all soon.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Everyone.